Good morning. In this video, I want to give you some insights into the ways in which you can do well in your second assignment for this subject, EDU 121. In your third assignment, you'll have the opportunity to consider the ways in which people understand knowledge, learning, information, and worldview from two Indigenous perspectives. But in this assignment that precedes that, in the second assignment, we ask you to reflect on your own worldview, the ways in which you understand knowledge, and the ways in which your ideas about what we know and our view of the world have developed over time. If you want to, you can connect these back to ancient Greek ways of thinking, the Enlightenment, and modernity, and you could do quite a strong reflection on the nature of the modern world and how we see and understand the world around us from a modernist perspective. Certainly there's a focus in modern times on the scientific, on the material, on the empirical, that which can be measured. And there's a lot of benefits to that, but that can be quite different to Indigenous worldviews and other ways of viewing the world. And it can be either different or connected to Christian ways of viewing the world. So as we look at assignment 2, your minor essay, we're suggesting that for your 30% mark, you'll need to be studying a quote from Vardy. And Peter Vardy, in his book, What is Truth, has written, "Truth is something that will never be arrived at easily, but only by struggle, by searching and a willingness to be open to alternatives. It will be only found by those who live the truth and reject the easy option of living a lie. These individuals will stoke their lives with a search and passion and commitment and seek to pierce through the veils of illusions, the masks of falsehood, the constructs of society and the self. Truth lies outside the comfort zone and security blanket, and it may only be accessible by those who have troubled about existence and who are prepared to stake their lives on the search," says Peter Vardy. So in this assignment, we ask you to reflect on Vardy's statement, and we ask you to consider your own worldview. We ask you to reflect on the various influences that formed your own personal worldview and identify the key forces that have shaped your understanding of truth, to consider the ways in which different ways of knowing might affect diverse students' understanding of truth. And you can include a sizable section here that reflects on the ways in which your understanding of truth developed over time. From childhood, how did you think about truth? Through teenage years, how did you think about truth? And what's your view of truth now? And what's influenced this view of truth? In an educational setting, you can reflect on the ways in which views of truth change with age and change over time. We ask you, with reference to the syllabus documents in general, for the place where you're living and teaching, whether you're in the city or out in the suburbs or in the country, to reflect on your subject specificity. How does this fit in with the wider educational framework? What's led to your interest in a particular subject area, and how does your interest in the subject area fit in with other subjects that are wider and different to your own subjects? How does knowing in your subject area come about? What are the different views of knowing in your subject area, and how do they compare to other ways of knowing? This can include personal reflection, but if you do include personal reflection, it's important to interact with scholarly resources that tell us about why people hold the particular views that you're writing about and talking about. It's important that you interact with a network of strong scholars and their resources in order to understand these ways of knowing more fully and deeply. Factors to be considered could include pedagogical practice. They could include reflections on how children and teenagers know at different ages, and how we in teaching communicate in various ways to them. And often it's beneficial to compare 2 or 3 different ways of teaching and 2 or 3 different ways of knowing, and looking at the strengths and limitations of both approaches. You could look at literature and literacy, and how people develop a knowledge of language, how they use it, and how it influences their way of knowing. You could look at numeracy and mathematics, and how people develop a knowledge of number and mathematical developments. And you could look at how these develop and change over time, and different views on these. And you could compare 2 or 3 or more scholars who have written on this. You could look at the importance of assessment, and what is being assessed, and how are different approaches being assessed. And you could look at classroom management and behavior management. How do we work with students who are less interested or find it difficult to be disciplined or concentrate? And you could also look at students with special needs, if these are your areas of greatest interest. How do we understand knowing, educating, teaching from a particular perspective, which you are going to focus on in this assignment? And then in the next assignment, we'll compare this to Indigenous ways of knowing and other ways of knowing. You could look at gifted education. You could look at information and communication. You could look at the influence of new technologies. There's quite a wide open range of possibilities that you could explore in this assignment, where the focus is on how do you as a person, as a teacher, know and engage with knowledge? How do you engage with teaching from your worldview, from your perspective, from a perspective about knowledge that at times might be known as a modern perspective, Western perspective? That's what we're concentrating on here. And then in the third assignment, we're comparing that with 2 other ways of knowing. You could look at the rubric for this essay in order to see what characteristics will give a higher grade. For instance, in the criteria of understanding the influences that have shaped personal worldviews and how these impact on teaching and organizational processes in effective education of young people from diverse backgrounds, including Indigenous backgrounds, to get a high distinction, you'd want to demonstrate a high level, an excellent level of understanding of the influences on your life. So rather than simply describe the influences on your life, you're wanting to look for evidence and look and interact with scholars who have written on the major influences on your world, Western world, modern world, that have influenced you. Or you could look at the postmodern world too, if you feel that describes your worldview. And you could look at Christian perspectives if you feel that describes your worldview. And within Christian perspectives, you could look at particular denominational perspectives. You could also look at tensions within your worldview. I know as a science teacher, I found at times there was a tension between science and empirically measuring and observing, and Christian faith, which included faith in the unseen God and a sense of revelation of God speaking to me. And then as I did further study, I found that there are often strong links between the two. That is, many very famous scientists, including Isaac Newton and Leonardo da Vinci and others, have described the ways in which they had a sense that the mysterious, the unknown that fascinated them, led them to explore and to seek out knowledge. And they felt they were doing the work of God, that they were cooperating with God in order to understand his purposes. And so I found there was a coming together of these different worldviews, the Christian worldview and the scientific worldview. And then I found in my teaching that different students would respond to science in different ways, and some would have an interest in the doing and technology, others would have an interest in the more mysterious, others would have an interest in that which they could measure empirically to be very disciplined on, and others would be more creative. And I found that it was important to understand the different approaches that students brought to their interest in science, and the reasons why some didn't fit in and didn't find it so interesting. And so it's the level of understanding that you're seeking to communicate about your worldview and how it came to about. In the second criteria of demonstrating knowledge and understanding of the impact of different ways of knowing on the multiple facets of teaching practice, including literacy, numeracy, acquisition, classroom management, we list out a number of different ways of knowing in this subject. And you can reflect on different ways in which people know. And some know intuitively, they have a sense that ideas just come to them, and others know through careful observation and measurement and through repeated experiment, and others know through relationship and cooperation with others. Others know through questioning and doubt, and others know through building on the knowledge of others and testing that knowledge. There's various ways in which we know, and it's important for us to understand where do these different ideas about knowledge and teaching practice and ideas about your subject area come from. And the more you can demonstrate an understanding of this, and you can provide a clear analysis of these different ways of knowing and their strengths and limitations and their application in the classroom, the better you'll do in this assignment. You're also wanting to provide evidence of the analysis and the synthesis of the research that you do. And so interaction with strong scholars and evaluating the strength of these scholars and working with the different sources of knowledge will be very important. And also important will be the way that you present your material. That is, you go over it and edit it and rework it, and you develop a sound structure and one overall argument together with a number of subpoints. All of this will be particularly important in gaining a good result for your assignment, but also in demonstrating a high degree of understanding, growth, and knowledge that you have gained from doing this assignment. So in order to do well, then you need to show an excellent understanding of the influences on your worldview. You need to show the impact of your worldview on people around and in the classroom, and you need to show that you're able to analyze this material and provide evidence of this analysis of your material. I'm sure this will be a very interesting and valuable assignment, partly because it'll help you understand why you hold the views you do, because of the influences upon you. And it'll help you understand how you can develop even stronger commitment to and engagement with the various sources of knowledge around you. And it'll help you to understand some of the ways in which you communicate these different understandings of knowledge to the students around you. And I encourage you to interact with scholars who've written on various educational models to understand the different ways students learn, and arguments for one model being more effective than another, and arguments for how these different ways of knowing and understanding can be applied in the classroom. If you have any questions, certainly get in touch, send a message, chat with me further. I look forward to working with you on this second assignment, and I'm sure it'll be great benefit to you.